Hello everybody, it's Sarah and welcome to this video that is outside of my usual uploading schedule. Both in terms of day as well as probably in time, because to be honest, I just decided to throw my uploading schedule out the window because I just can't deal with it currently with my uni stress. So yeah, I'm gonna try to get you 2 videos a week, but who knows which days I'll manage. I'll still try to make it Thursdays and Sundays, but if not, then no big deal. But anyway, today's video is going to be a review, and that review is of Scorpica by G.R. McAllister, which is the first book in the 5 Queendoms series, and I was given an e-arc of this by the publisher in return for an honest review, and I have obviously also purchased the physical copy since. Both because I just like having something to hold up in my reviews, but also because I did genuinely enjoy the book. And so if I enjoy a book, I usually want to have a physical copy of it. So as all of my reviews, this review will be spoiler free. I will start with a little synopsis of this book, although in this case I think I'll more talk about the premise of the book rather than a proper synopsis. And then I will go into my thoughts, which I will start with my negative thoughts, then more neutral thoughts, and ending with my positive thoughts. But first, a synopsis. And as I said, in this case more a premise. The premise of this book is that you have 5 queendoms, so 5 matriarchal societies that very much historically, socially, politically are connected to each other. And one day there's a little issue, especially for matriarchal societies, and that is that one day the last girl is born. And so we follow these 5 queendoms in the following 10 years through the drought of girls, as no more girls are being born, which especially hits one of the queendoms quite badly because they are kind of an Amazon inspired queendom, so there's no men whatsoever, and every time a baby is born that is judged as male, it is given to one of the other queendoms to adopt. And so yeah, within this one queendom there's literally only women. So that is the general premise of this book, which actually put this book on my radar already before the publisher contacted me to ask me if I wanted an e-arc of this. And yeah, now let's get into my thoughts. So first, as I said, let's start with the negatives, and let's start with the biggest negative for me, and that is something that I personally look out for a lot in my fantasy books, and you will already know this if you've been on my channel for a longer while, and that is the representation of queer characters within books. Now there are quite a few characters that are sapphic, so there is representation of homosexuality, which I will get to later on when I talk about the positives. However, my issue with the queer representation in this book was that the premise already very much perpetuates a cis-binary worldview, because first of all you have this one queendom that I talked about where you only have women and where every baby that is deemed male is sent away. It's never really mentioned, you know, what if those babies don't end up being men? Do those babies end up not being men? And it's something that is very important to me because I feel like if we create new worlds, if we create secondary worlds in fantasy, it is even more important to specifically show how queerness plays into the world building, because otherwise it could just be as if queerness does not exist, or specific types of queerness don't exist within the world building. I do not think, from what I read within this book, this was maliciously done, that transness within this book is ignored, because there is one character mentioned once that uses they them pronouns, so at least non-binary people obviously exist within this world. But I just personally would have wished for a bit more specific representation. It doesn't have to be the focus of the story. You can have all your main characters be cis, but I still would like, you know, a mention that yes, these people do exist. And yes, maybe there are trans women among those warrior folk, the warrior queendom. Maybe it also was specifically something that was very obvious to me, because last year I did also read a book that was a Greek myth retelling following the Amazons. Were amongst the Amazons, even though there were no men, there were trans women, there were non-binary people, both with male as well as female genitalia, and so you had a lot of diversity in that direction, and I just would have wished a bit more of that to be in this book as well. But yeah, hopefully we'll get to see more in future books, but this first one was very much lacking in that direction, sadly. So now that we have the one big thing out of the way, the rest of the negatives I would say are more like cosmetic things and personal preference. First, in terms of the writing, there was one negative thing about the writing, and that is sometimes the POVs switched within chapters. And I don't mean that you had like end of a POV, scene change, or you know, a space in between lines or anything, but that within a scene, within 2 sentences, we were suddenly in another character's head, which sometimes confused me a little bit. And so I think that was something that wasn't necessarily something I enjoyed. Then in terms of characters, I did enjoy the characters. I'll get to it later. The only thing that confused me a little bit was that there was one character where at the beginning of the story it kind of felt like the story would set up to follow this character, but then that character just completely vanished and was not mentioned ever again. And so yeah, I think we're probably gonna get more of that character in future installments, but in this one specifically we didn't get any more. I don't think it's necessarily really a negative, it was just really abrupt that that character didn't come back at all, and that it also didn't feel like there were hints as to where this character would now be. So at least not any hints that I saw, but maybe I just also didn't properly read the book. Who knows? In terms of characters and POVs also, there were some chapters where we just got the POV of a side character, just randomly got the POV of a side character, which I wasn't always too much of a fan of. It felt like sometimes it was lacking intention in which POV was chosen to tell a story, and why we heard from this certain character right now. But it's just, you know, those little things, little cosmetic things that I don't really mind in the grand scheme of things. Also in terms of, I guess, lacking intention a little bit in the explanations of the world building. And first of all, I want to say that I do not mind info dumps or info exposition, anything, because I read a lot of fantasy. In fantasy, when you introduce a whole new world, you kind of need info dumps, you need a lot of exposition to make the reader aware of what's going on within the world, to make the reader familiar with the world. However, with this one, sometimes with the info dumps, it felt a little bit like the author created this world and created more things than she needed for the story, and more things than we needed to understand what was going on. And so it felt like she didn't want to, you know, not share those things with the reader. And so there were sometimes those little short, just paragraphs, so it wasn't long at all, just short little paragraphs of info dumps that just felt like they were just put there, and like they didn't really have anything to do with the story surrounding it and with the scene that was currently happening, which actually I think maybe part of the reason why it felt like that also, and why they felt out of place, was because I personally actually felt like this story was too short, like this book was too short for the world building that we got, and I wish actually we would have gotten more. This is quite short for a fantasy book. It's just over 400 pages, and for that we got a lot of POVs, we got a lot of different perspectives, we got a lot of different parts of the world where things were set in, so we got a lot of information. And it both sometimes felt like it was a little bit crowded, but also at the same time it felt like we didn't get enough information for the stuff that is obviously there in the background. And so I just put it with negatives, but it's not necessarily a negative because, you know, wanting more from a story, I mean, can be a negative sometimes, but in this case it wasn't the negative type of I didn't get enough, but it was just, you know, I wish there was more, and it's something that certainly makes me excited to see where the story is going and where we're going in the future with the world building and so on, and maybe see if we can get some of the information on some of the parts in the world that we didn't get to see that much of in this book. So I think that's it for the things that I thought were negative, although I don't necessarily think they were negative. It's more things that I wish were done differently for my reading enjoyment. And so now moving on to the more neutral things, and that for me mainly is the writing. The writing in this book is not necessarily the type of writing that I prefer in my novels. It's the type of writing that I would call a tool. Like in fantasy, and I have talked about that in other reviews before, in fantasy for me there's really two big types of writing. One is the type of writing where the writing is simply a tool, let's say Brandon Sanderson for example, and one is the writing where the writing is part of the focus of the story. Pat Rothfuss, for example, or Joe Abercrombie also. And this certainly falls into the category of writing as a tool, which, if you like it or not, is really down to your own preference. I have friends who really like it if the writing is very elaborate, and I have friends who are mostly distracted from the plot if the writing is really elaborate. So, you know, it comes down to your preference whether or not that is a thing that you like. Then something else I want to put in neutrals is the way the plot is structured, which the reason why I want to put it in neutrals is because I think personally it's very unique, and so I can't really judge once again if it's something that you'll enjoy or you won't enjoy. And that is that, first of all, something I did enjoy is that the plot of this book is very much self-contained. I enjoyed in adult high fantasy if the first book of a series is self-contained while still setting up things for the future of the series and where it's gonna go, which we did get in this book. However, something I found very interesting is that the plot that's being set up at the beginning of this novel, which I thought would be the main plot of the novel, then is kind of abandoned, and we get a bigger story, a more all-encompassing story of all the 5 queendoms and not just the one queendom. And this is the story that is self-contained, whereas the story that just follows the one queendom is the one that's gonna be continued on in the future of the series, which was something that I found very interesting, because usually it's the smaller plot or the seemingly smaller plot that's, you know, the one that's self-contained within the first book or the second book or whatever. And then there's also, I think, a third plot line that's already being set up of, you know, an even bigger threat within the history of this world, which I also find very interesting. So yeah, there's a lot going on already for a very short book, and yeah, gonna be very interested to see where it's going in the future. Also, if I'm completely overexposed right now, I am sorry, but the sun just came out. So now for the things that are solidly in the positive sphere. First of all, the characters. I did really enjoy the characters. We did get a lot of POV characters, as I said, for a first book already, but something I really enjoyed is that we followed very different POV characters from very different parts of the world, and so we got to see a lot of perspectives, how people in different parts of the world react to this drought of girls, which is something that I enjoy in fantasy. It's part of the reason why I read fantasy, because I get so many POVs, because I get to see the details of how different people react to a situation. And also something I really enjoyed with the POVs is that we didn't just follow the good guys, we also followed the villains of the story, I guess, or some characters who maybe are more morally gray. And so we really got to know their motivations, why they're doing what they're doing. It wasn't always pleasant to follow them, because I did end up quite annoyed with those characters a lot of times, But, you know, that can be a positive thing also. It definitely wasn't the type of annoyance where I was like, oh my god, I just want to skip this POV. No, not at all. I still wanted to follow those POVs. It was just very interesting to go into depth with some of the characters that maybe on a surface level you just absolutely don't agree with, and to see their motivations. Also, something that I forgot a little bit in neutrals is that I found the magic system pretty interesting. It's not necessarily the magic system for you if you're very much into hard magic systems, but for me, while a lot of fantasy readers seem to think hard magic systems are better, it's all about what the story needs. This story absolutely did not need a hard magic system, and I thought the concept was really, really interesting with the magic system, and I hope we'll get to see more of the magic in future books. Like, not all characters in this book are magical or have magic abilities, but those that did, just I very much enjoyed what they did with the magic. So continuing on with the world building, I actually have something that might seem contrary to what I said earlier with the world building, where I said it at the same time seemed too much and not enough. I also feel like the world building overall was really well done, because we did have those 5 queendoms and we did get a little bit from each queendom. We got a little bit of the politics of each queendom, we got a little bit of how each queendom reacted to the drought of girls, but at the same time, with how short the book was, we also didn't try to go like zoom in on all the queendoms, but we only really focused in depth on 2 of them. So I thought that was really well done, and overall I just enjoyed the social world building aspect of this book. As you know, I'm a social world building over magical world building person, and that was definitely within this book, where, you know, we got to see the social ramifications of what happened after there were no more girls being born, also with the men in some of the other queendoms. Did I say kingdom sometimes in this video? If I did, I am very sorry. I meant queendoms always. But yeah, we got to see that. I mean, it was still more what I would consider character focused. So we more so saw how the different characters reacted, rather than going in depth really on how the different societies reacted. But I think that was also just have been too much for the story. But nevertheless, we still got enough of the societal aspect to satisfy my needs. So yeah, I think, let me just look at my review that I wrote. I think that was everything that I had to say about this book. Oh yeah, that was the thing that I also wanted to mention. There were a few POV characters, none I think of the like main characters, although I think some of them might be main characters in future books, but you know, as of this book, that were LGBT, but there were quite a few main side characters that were sapphic, because all the characters in this book that we follow are women, so all of them were sapphic. And so yeah, I did really appreciate that. I had to wait a little bit for the first sapphic character to appear, which was where I was like, am I gonna enjoy this book? Am I not gonna enjoy this book? But then the first saphics appeared and I was very happy with that. And yeah, that was it, I think, for my review for Scorpica. If you have read it or you want to read it, share your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries are left in the description box down below, so go and check those out. And I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!